Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm Denver Police Chief Ron Thomas, and I'm accompanied today by Major Crimes Division Commander Matt Clark. And today we will be providing a much more detailed briefing on two officer-involved shootings that happened within the last week or so. Understanding that you all have received copies of the body-worn camera videos, so this is just a follow-up briefing to provide further detail and context to those situations. These two incidents, the first occurred Friday, August 22nd at about Yale and Dahlia. The second incident occurred Monday, August 25th at about Alameda and Lipan. Now, I understand that there will be questions related to each incident, and so what we will do is we'll pause after each presentation and then we'll entertain questions specific to those individual incidents as best we can. So, Matt?
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Clark. I'm the commander of the Major Crimes Division for the Denver Police Department. Today's briefings are a follow-up to the officer-involved shooting briefings that were provided by Chief Thomas on August 22nd and August 25th. The information I'll be providing is based on witness statements, interviews with the officers, and the evidence collected from each of the scenes. There may be questions I can't answer. We do have a charged offender in one of the cases, but to the degree we're able to, we'll address any questions after each incident. On August 22nd, 2025, at 4:03 a.m., the Denver Communications Center received a 911 call reporting gunshots heard on the third floor of an apartment building in the 4900 block of East Donald Avenue. The caller specifically reported hearing 8 gunshots inside the building. Uniformed Denver police officers quickly arrived and began checking the area. At approximately 4:12 in the morning, a separate 911 call reporting a domestic disturbance occurring at the location was received by the communications center. The caller reported a female running from a male on the second floor and described the female as screaming and crying. The officers then observed a female running down the stairs, followed closely by a male subject. The male exited through the back door and attempted to flee on a bicycle. Officers pursued the subject and repeatedly ordered him to stop. The officers prevented the subject from riding the bicycle, but he was able to break free from their hold and ran northwest into a parking lot of a neighboring business. At that location, he physically resisted officers' efforts to restrain and did not comply with their commands. During the struggle, the subject produced a firearm. An officer immediately recognized the weapon and alerted other officers to the presence of the gun. Another officer who was present grabbed the muzzle of the subject's firearm to control the direction and prevent the subject from firing. While still holding the firearm in his right hand, the subject grabbed the grip of an officer's holstered firearm with his left hand in an apparent attempt to disarm the officer. Fearing the subject would fire the weapon in his hand, an officer discharged one round from his duty handgun, striking the subject. That individual fell to the ground and was quickly secured by officers. They immediately began rendering life-saving measures. The individual was transported to an area hospital where he was pronounced deceased. The Denver officer, the medical examiner, confirmed the identity of the subject as 48-year-old Javier Nava Carbajal. At the scene, investigators recovered a replica CO2 revolver loaded with 6 rounds of live 9mm ammunition. This was the firearm that Mr. Nava Carbajal produced during the struggle. Although the ammunition in the firearm was real and visible in the cylinder of the revolver, the replica weapon was not capable of discharging those rounds. It was determined that the Denver police officer fired 1 round from his duty weapon. That officer is assigned to the patrol division in District 3. He's a uniformed officer. He's been with the department since 2024 and has not been involved in a prior police shooting incident. All the officers present had their body-worn cameras activated and captured the interaction with the subject. In accordance with the department's policy, each officer has been placed in a non-line assignment while they complete the department's reintegration protocol. This does remain an active investigation. Anyone with information, we would ask they contact the Denver Police Department or submit information anonymously through Metro Denver Crime Stoppers. And I'll show a brief, some slides that we recovered of crime scene photo and then of the firearm the subject had, and then answer any questions. This is a photo taken from the scene showing the revolver as it was on the ground, and on the front of the cylinder, the 9mm rounds that were loaded into it. and were visible to the front of the weapon. This is the weapon after it was recovered by the crime scene technicians with the rounds removed. And we can address any questions on this incident at this point.
Is that pretty typical to spot that type of weapon, how you described it, where it has live ammunition but not capable of firing? Is that pretty typical?
No, it's not typical for a replica weapon to be loaded with live ammunition. We don't see that often at all.
So how do you explain that then?
So the individual, somebody put live ammunition in that weapon, and there was no way that weapon was capable of discharging it. But if you're looking at that weapon from the front, you would see in the cylinder those rounds of ammunition.
If I remember correctly, police were unable to find the female party immediately after the incident. Have they been able to locate her since, and what's been her cooperation with this?
We have not located the other half of that initial domestic violence call, or the female that he was behind when officers contacted him. And again, if anybody has information on that individual, we'd like to talk to them.
If I remember the video correctly, initially is one officer's body cam footage. This is toward the beginning of the video, if you don't comply, you'll be tased, something along those lines. Is that typically how that would work? And then obviously when you fast forward to the end result, it is you're using an actual gun versus a taser weapon. Is that how that kind of plays out?
Yeah, so you do see the officer produce the taser, which I think initially, during the initial struggle, I think would have been the appropriate response there. But obviously, I think that there was not an opportunity to discharge that taser because there were two officers that were closely engaged with that person. So it would have been unlikely to get an appropriate contact in order to trigger that that taser. And then obviously, as that escalated and the gun was produced, it quickly evolved into a situation where a taser would not have been an appropriate response.
Did the suspect in this case have any prior interactions with police or criminal history?
So we typically don't talk about prior criminal history as it relates to an individual, and it wasn't germane to this contact. The officers who were involved did not know this individual personally or hadn't dealt with him before.
Did you say you responded twice to this location?
So there was one response, but it wound up being two calls because they overlapped. So they were there at 4:03 on the initial call of shots heard, and then there was a call at 4:12. The officers were already on scene when this domestic disturbance was reported by a third person. Sir.
Officers were there in initial call of shots heard, but this firearm confirmed is not capable of shooting?
That's correct.
Okay, so that...
We don't believe that this individual that we interacted with was involved in the shots fired call. We don't have any evidence to support that.
Can you just explain again toward the very end, you spot the replica weapon, where it goes to that, and then the suspect allegedly reaching for an officer's, that moment?
So the same officer that was attempting to control the muzzle of the firearm, so at that point, the offender has this weapon in his right hand. Our officer is attempting to control that muzzle, and they're kind of struggling over the firearm. The offender with his left hand grabs that officer's, the handle of that officer's firearm, which is holstered. He never removes it from the holster, but he has his hand on the holster, and the officer recognizes that the individual is pulling on the firearm. Anything else on this one? Thank you. All right, we'll talk about the second one. On August 25th, 2025, around 8:25 in the morning, the Denver Communications Center received a 911 call reporting a male was pointing a firearm at passing vehicles in the area of Alameda Avenue and Lipan Street. Responding officers located that individual and found him, the individual matching that description in the parking lot on the north side of the 1200 block of West Alameda Avenue. At that point, he was standing behind a shopping cart. The officers parked near the location and had their emergency lights activated. The uniformed officers exited their vehicle and directed the subject to show his hands. The subject quickly produced a firearm and pointed it directly at the officers. Fearing he was intending to shoot the officers, two uniformed officers discharged their duty handguns at the subject. The subject appeared to fall to the ground at that point, but moments later was seen waving the firearm above the shopping cart. The officers repeatedly instructed him to drop the weapon and attempted to de-escalate the situation to gain his compliance from a distance while they negotiated with him. This went on for several minutes. Despite these efforts, he maintained control of the firearm. Additional officers took positions to the northeast of the subject, giving them a clear view of him behind the shopping cart. An officer armed with a department-approved rifle observed the subject move his finger from the grip of the firearm into the trigger guard. That officer also recognized a change in the subject's body posture and the firearm's position. Believing the subject was about to shoot at the officers to his south at the other end of the parking lot, the officer discharged one round from his rifle, striking the subject. Once the subject was incapacitated, officers formulated a plan to safely approach and render aid. An ambulance was previously staged nearby and was called in to assist. The subject was transported to Denver Health Medical Center for treatment to a gunshot wound to the face, and he remains hospitalized and is expected to survive. That individual has been identified as 62-year-old Alan Scott. Investigators and crime scene technicians recovered a replica Walther PPK BB gun, which was the weapon that was pointed at the officers. A total of 10 rounds were fired by 3 uniformed officers, 9 from duty handguns and 1 from the department-approved rifle. Mr. Scott has been formally charged with felony menacing by the Denver District Attorney's Office. The officers involved in this incident are assigned to the Patrol Division in District 4 in Southwest Denver. 2 of the officers joined the department in 2018, the other in 2021, and none of the 3 have been involved in a prior police shooting. All officers present, including witness officers, had body-worn cameras present and captured the interaction with the individual. These officers as well will go through the department's reintegration protocol and be on a non-line assignment. Again, this is an active investigation. We know there was a lot of motorists and people in the area at the time, so if there's any additional information or witnesses that we haven't spoken to, we'd encourage you to contact Denver Metro Crime Stoppers so we can make contact. These investigations are being conducted by the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, Colorado State Patrol, the Denver Police Homicide Unit, and the Denver DA's office. They're all overseen by the Office of the Independent Monitor. I have one slide just to show the firearm that we recovered. It's the replica Walther PPK BB gun. This was the firearm that the subject had and pointed at the officers in this case. We can address any questions. Yes, ma'am.
In this incident on the 25th, it took about 7 minutes for officers to render aid, like you had said, because they couldn't see his hands. Is there any protocol or equipment that could have sped that up?
They were actively working to make a plan. They had an ambulance staged and ready to go. They knew that the individual was still alive and moving and had not separated himself from that firearm. So they gathered a shield, which was present at the scene, and once they had a sufficient team and a plan to approach, they did so.
How many officers were on the scene?
There was 3 initially, and then by the end, there was upwards of 10 or 12 officers and supervisors on scene as well.
What was the initial call for again?
We had a passerby, a motorist, reporting that the individual was near Alameda and Lipan pointing a firearm at passing vehicles.
And I assume that's this one,
That-
and is there any mental health or suicide by, I don't know if you can speculate on that. I mean, it's sort of, you're wondering why someone would do something like this with a big gun.
Those are probably answers that we'll never have. Pure speculation, I think, to assume that that he had any kind of mental health history or issue or anything like that. We do believe that he was homeless. There's a likelihood that he possessed that weapon to protect himself, and why on that day he chose to threaten passing motorists and then subsequently threaten officers with that particular weapon or that replica weapon is unknown.
Do you have any evidence he was on drugs or anything?
So not yet, and he's expected to survive, and so I don't anticipate would have access to toxicology records or anything from the hospital due to his HIPAA considerations.
The 3 videos that were released seem to show officers arriving on scene after those initial 3 officers were already there. Why was the body cam footage from those initial 3 officers that maybe shows a longer interaction between this man and police before the shots were fired? Why weren't those released?
So 2 of the 3 are the first arriving officers. Those are the ones that pull up on Alameda in the 1200 block. One's in an unmarked police vehicle with emergency equipment. One's in a marked police vehicle with their emergency equipment activated. So those two were two officers that discharged their duty handguns on Alameda. Those were the first initial arriving officers. You'll hear them exit their cars, give a brief command, and then the next thing that one of the officers' camera captures is the subject raising the firearm directly at them. The other officer did arrive later. He was actually a primary responder and initially dispatched on the scene, but went to a different location initially in that immediate area and recognized once they found the individual, he repositioned his vehicle over to that location and was a primary responder as well. So the three primary dispatched officers were provided as well. These three officers were the ones that discharged their weapons during the incident.
So in a matter of days, or across that days, you have two officer-involved shootings with two suspects carrying fake handguns. Is that, or non-lethal, I should say. So like, is that a growing trend? Is that something you're seeing more? And if so, how is training or any sort of department procedures helping combat that?
I would say that is a significant concern. I do recall another incident, officer-involved shooting, where the individual had a replica firearm. So it is apparently a growing trend. That is something that we'll continue to track. Continue to work with our academy to see if there are other, opportunities to continue to de-escalate. But as you can see from these two firearms, the other firearm or the other replica firearm that was used, I mean, these are look so closely to a real weapon that I wouldn't expect any officer to act differently.
There's also a spate of instances where they're disobeying commands. And we've heard this in Aurora in the past
Yes.
few days as well. I don't know what you can do to make people obey a command.
Well, certainly that is helpful. I will say that we have, both Denver and Aurora, we have had a number of armed encounters, the majority of which end peacefully with, individuals discarding their weapons or following directions and us recovering those weapons without any application of force whatsoever. And so that is our preference. That is, our training. It's unfortunate that individuals don't respond to the commands that they're given and make movements that are threatening and that put officers in danger of being harmed. And so they respond, I think, appropriately.
I do want to go back actually just to the East Donald incident just for a moment. In the video, at around the 5-minute mark, there is that interaction where the officer goes in, the suspect is just on the ground, flat on their stomach, and they go in to handcuff them and only administer, medical assistance afterwards. I'm just wondering, considering all the research that's been done on prone positioning and arrests, I just wanted to know, why wasn't first aid administered first?
So our first consideration is to render the scene safe, and so that means securing the suspect. And we have conferred with medical experts to identify the fact that even though someone may be handcuffed behind their back, that those medical intervention efforts are still effective.
And just for a clarification on the chronology, Commander, can you speak to the incident on Alameda? There was an initial 9 shots fired. Was the individual struck by any of those, or was it just the final gunshot at the end of the incident?
So again, based on the information we have and the access we've had, which has been limited to him in the hospital, we believe that the gunshot, the 9 gunshots that were fired by the officers with handguns on Alameda did not strike the individual, and he was struck by the rifle round that was fired by the officer who was positioned northeast of the subject.
In both of these cases, was there any indication that these suspects were trying to tell police these guns were fake, or is there no information to suggest that this time?
So we heard, I believe in one of the videos on Donald, you hear the subject make a comment, it's not real. But that was during the height of the struggle that they were in over this firearm, and as around the time when the officers, the individual has a hand on the officer's grip. So whether or not they recognize that, I'm not sure. And given the height of that struggle and everything that was going on, it would have been very difficult to interpret his actions as that being a fake firearm the way he was trying to maintain it.
Thank you.